mysteries of creation are there. In the sky. Up in the sky. The moon and the planets are there. And new hopes for knowledge and peace are there.
Hello and welcome to your Inner Journey weather forecast for the week of the 29th to the 6th of December. And in your Inner Journey weather forecast, we utilize archetypal astrology to help you understand the energies and themes that you might encounter in your psychedelic journeys and the psychedelic journeys of your clients, how to navigate them. So let's look at the alignments for this week using Archetypal Explorer. So this week we have not exact alignments. The exact alignments would be at the top of the graph here. So we actually don't have any exact alignments this week. But what I would like to show you is if I turn off all what are called the inner planets, we can see an alignment that is building here. It's a building alignment. That's a very important one that's known as Saturn square Uranus. So let's talk about Saturn square Uranus. Saturn square Uranus is a very tense alignment. Saturn and Uranus themselves, already the archetypes of Saturn and Uranus are somewhat opposite archetypes. Saturn has to do with tradition. It has to do with groundedness, maturity, certainty, structure, discipline, conservatism. Uranus has to do with the thrill, the excitement, spontaneity, rebellion, freedom from structure, uncertainty. And so the two together naturally have a kind of a tension. And when they're in a square alignment, the tension is all the more present. And we can see it in our society today. This alignment has actually been with us for over a year and a half, and it has about over a year and a half to go. And though the alignment is coming very tight over this week and coming weeks over through the holidays, the alignment will be very tight. And as the alignment becomes closer to exact, we can really feel it working on us, asking us to reconcile these seemingly unreconcilable energies. So one of the ways that Uranus shows up is as the thrill and the excitement of innovation and of breakthroughs and of technology. And one of the ways that Saturn can show up is consequences, judgments, consequences, kind of the fruit, the karma, the karmic fruit, the consequences of actions. And so when the two are together, we can see the consequences of innovation, the consequences of technological innovation. And indeed, that's what we're navigating today. Recently, there was a investigation into Facebook. And just in recent weeks, the Joe Rogan podcast had as its guests Tristan Harris and David Schmachtenbacher, who are analysts, social media analysts, specialists. And the discussion that took place there was very much about the consequences of technology, because it turns out that social media is a technology that is seeking views and attention of its users, and that which gains the views and attention of its users is incendiary content gains the attention of its viewers because it excites the part of the human mind that wants to know more. It wants to know more about this incendiary train of thought, where it could go. It's kind of like wanting to close one's eyes as one looks at a disaster, but also wanting to see where the disaster is going as the disaster is taking place. There's a part of the mind that is attracted to want to know more, when it encounters incendiary information. And so the content that is incendiary gets upregulated. To quote the social media specialist Tristan Harris, he says, everywhere there's a way in which a small move in any direction can be shown to lead to another big boogeyman, and that big boogeyman makes us angry, social media is going to upregulate everything to be its worst possible conclusion. So that's a quote from Tristan Harris. So it's upregulating the worst possible conclusion because that's what's going to get views. And what happens there is a sort of a polarization of viewers because they're going down different rabbit holes towards worst possible conclusions. Everybody's going down all different sorts of rabbit holes towards worst possible conclusions because that part of the brain is lit up. And then another discovery on top of that is that other countries and entities actually create AIs, or artificial intelligence, that infiltrate groups and infiltrate feeds with disinformation that's incendiary, particularly because they know that it will get more views, which in turn increases the kind of polarization of going down different rabbit holes towards worst possible conclusions. So here we have the example of social media as technology, and its consequences are very grave. It's a kind of a fracturing of the structures of our society. And so that's one example of how this combination is showing up in the world. Another example is Uranus and Saturn and Uranus are themselves kind of polarized even otherwise when they're together. So the consequences of technology is that technology is polarizing. So consequences Saturn of technology Uranus, though Saturn and Uranus themselves are also polarizing because Uranus is associated with liberalism and freedom, and Saturn's associated with conservatism and tradition. And so when the two are in tension together, we oftentimes see in tension different groups, that different kind of social groups, including liberals and conservatives. So we see that tension there enacting out again in the outer world as this polarization. So how does this show up in our psychedelic journeys? In the psychedelic journeys, the Saturn Uranus can show up as it can show up in quite a variety of ways, some of which include the freedom Uranus of going back to simplicity, Saturn, the freedom Uranus of going back to the past, Saturn, or it could be sudden breaks of freedom from the past. So sudden breaks of freedom, Uranus, from the past, Saturn. Another way it can show up is a sudden maturation process. So a maturation is Saturn and the suddenness is Uranus. It can be a kind of a leap in maturity that happens through a eureka moment in our psychedelic journeys, a leap in responsibility, a leap of stepping up into responsibility that is sudden and unexpected, but is actually liberating. It's actually liberating to step into a mature role. That's very Saturn Uranus way of experiencing those energies. Another way it can show up in psychedelic journeys, which is possibly one of the best ways that it can show up and is actually exemplary of the positive benefits that psychedelic journeys can have on our larger culture as a whole, is that when somebody engages in therapeutic use of psychedelics, they have an inward-looking focus. They might be there with their sitters in a room that's particularly prepared for that activity, and they have an inward-looking focus, yet their archetypes are still present. So what they will encounter in their inward-looking focus is the same polarization. So the boogeyman's out there in the world that are seen as the other, that have a conflicting view, will be right there present in the journey with them, possibly feeling even closer than if they were observing it out in the world. And what this is exemplary of is that when we look out upon the world, we're actually looking out upon our own mind. So this is something that astrology exemplifies for us by the fact that when we look into space, the celestial bodies, the further into space of the celestial bodies we look, the more is reflected the depths of the space inside ourselves. So when we look into space and we look inside ourselves, it's two sides of the same coin reflecting each other. So the outer world and the inner world are not separate. And we can even go to the extent that when a person is born, because their birth chart is an illustration of not just their psyche and their nature, but is actually an illustration of their unfolding life story, we could say that with each person that's born, the universe, the entirety of the universe is born anew. So what you see out of your eyes is the universe that came into being when you were born. So the entire universe is born anew. And the paradox therein is that we're all existing together as our own universe, but yet we are sharing the field and coexisting together. And so when we experience our energies and our perspectives and psychedelic journeys, we realize that we look inward, everything that we're projecting outside is actually right there with us with these psychedelic journeys. And that can be the point of the reconciliation of the Saturn-Uranus energy, because the sense of a split, the polarization between like the liberal and the conservative, for instance, or the tradition and the innovation, is actually just a tension that we are experiencing within ourselves, that we are all experiencing, because it's a world transit in our different ways. We're all experiencing it, but it's happening within ourselves. When we go into our psychedelic journeys, it's actually the inner healer that reconciles those energies. We don't have to try to reconcile them out in the world. Or maybe we can after the psychedelic journey, when the reconciliation actually has begun within, which is the real kind of grounds of tension where these archetypes are at play. And so that part of that can be actually the realization, part of that reconciliation can be the realization that indeed, when we look out upon the world, we are indeed looking upon our own mind, which allows a lot more freedom for everybody else that you experience, any group or any person, to be themselves, because we're not just going to see them as we would normally see them, because we know that as we normally see them, they're just kind of like billboards for our own mind, our own projection. So that's one of the ideal ways that we can kind of reconcile these energies between Saturn and Uranus and psychedelic journeys at this time. So as always, I wish you a very fruitful week filled with psychospiritual growth, and a very fruitful time ahead engaging with the Saturn-Uranus energies and riding them along with our inner healing intelligence towards their best possible synergy. And if you would like to know how archetypal astrology works and how it can reveal your unique superpowers, check out the links below, and also check out the subscribe button below and click it so that you can get more updates every week about the weather, the inner journey, the inner weather for your inner journeys. So thank you so much for being here with me, and I look forward to seeing you next week.